Not electricity. That was centuries of other men's work. Not the first electric light. Not even, if we're honest, the first incandescent lamp.
I'd like to test that story.
I described the entire system to the New York Sun. The dynamos, the buried conductors, the meter on the wall. The lamp to make it real did not yet exist on my bench. The moment it was printed, gas shares in London wobbled and money came looking for me.
Why announce the finish before you'd run the race?
Was I ahead of my apparatus? Considerably.
Because this is the most famous night of your life, and nearly everything the public believes about it is wrong. Charles Batchelor kept the notebook, and in his hand it reads, "On from 1:30 a.m. till 3 p.m., 13 and a half hours."
Well, 40 hours does look better on a poster. The crowd saw a finish line. I was standing on it knowing it was a starting gun. I was never modest about my prospects, and I mean to answer for that.
So, after all of it, the promise, the platinum, the thread, the factory, the trench, the station, what did you actually invent?
Who breaks the past? Who lights the fire? The minds don't fade, they only rise higher.
I'm Atlas Ingram, and this is Immortal Minds, where the people who built the modern world sit down for the conversations they never got to have. You flipped a light switch without thinking of the man behind it, the one who, the story goes, invented the light bulb and lit the century. I'd like to test that story. Thomas Alva Edison, welcome.
Gladly. The world took one name and hung the whole electric light on it, and I did little to discourage that. A name that sells is worth having, but a name is not a pair of hands. I was never modest about my prospects, and I mean to answer for that.
Then let's start before any of it is settled. By 1878, you're famous with a laboratory that builds almost anything you sketch. But the one thing your name is welded to, a practical electric light, the kind a city could use, you have not solved. Not yet. So take me to the man at the edge of that.
The man at the edge of that had spent 20 years inside wires. I began as a telegraph operator, a boy sending Morse across the country for wages. That is where I learned the trade, circuits, currents, what it costs to push a signal down a line, and how it fails when you do. I improved the instruments, sold the patents, and used the money to build shops full of machinists who could make whatever I drew. By '76, I had it all under one roof at Menlo Park, a laboratory and a machine shop together, so a thing could be sketched in the morning and standing on the bench by night. I did not come to electric light as a dreamer. I came as a man who had been charging for electricity by the message for 2 decades.
So you're fluent in the part most people find mysterious. You think in circuits and in costs. And by 1877-78, you're not just a working inventor anymore. You're a celebrity. The phonograph, the carbon transmitter that finally made the telephone usable. The papers start calling you the Wizard of Menlo Park.
They did. A machine that took a voice and handed it back to you unsettled people in a way a better telegraph relay never could. And fame is useful. Reporters printed what I said. Men with money answered my letters. But let me be plain, because it matters later. None of that lit a room. A reputation buys you attention, capital, a little patience. It does not buy you a lamp that works.
Let me set the scene you were actually walking into, because it was not an empty field. By 1878, if you wanted to light a home or a street, you burned gas. And gas wasn't a gadget, it was a service. Pipes under the road, a meter on the wall, a bill at month's end. Whole cities ran on it. There was electric light too, arc lighting, blinding, marvelous for a public square or a factory floor, but far too fierce to hang over your dinner table. And the gentler idea, Heating a thread inside a glass until it glows, men in Britain and on the continent had been chasing for years before you. So what did all that wire and circuit experience let you see there?
That electricity making light was old news. Davy threw a brilliant arc across 2 rods before I was born. What no one had done was turn it into a business you could sell to an ordinary household the way the gas company already did. That was the wall. Gas wasn't primitive, it was entrenched. Cheap enough, laid through the streets, metered, familiar. To beat it, you'd need a light soft enough for a parlor, and a whole arrangement behind it as steady and as cheap as the pipe under the road. Nobody had that. I looked at it as a commercial man as much as an electrical one, and I thought that might be my advantage. I could not yet have told you it was more than a thought.
And that thought is what put you on a train in September of 1878, up to Ansonia, Connecticut, to William Wallace's works. Did you go there alone?
No, I traveled up with Charles Batchelor, my closest hand at the bench, and 2 men of science, George Barker, a physicist, and Charles Chandler. Wallace was running dynamos, generators, driving arc lamps, a working electrical plant of a kind you couldn't see just anywhere. I went to stand in front of a machine that was already making electric light at real scale, and to look at it with my own eyes.
But you've told me arc light can't go in a parlor. So what did you actually see there? Because it clearly wasn't, here's my answer.
I saw the power, and I saw the waste. Wallace had the generation, a machine turning coal and steam into current, and current into light. But it was arc light, a few enormous flames wired one after another, all on a single string. Grand for a foundry, useless for a home. And here is the thing that stayed with me on the train back. Those lamps sat in series, so they lived and died together as one circuit. That is not how a man lights his house. In your house, every lamp is its own master. You turn one up in the kitchen, another stays low in the hall, a third is dark entirely, and none of them asks permission of the others.
And that's the gas standard you described. So spell out the problem you set yourself, because I think this is the part people skip straight past to get to the bulb.
Because the bulb is the easy part to picture and the wrong part to worry about. The problem was never make one thing glow. Anyone could make a thing glow. The problem was to give a whole district what the gas company already gave it, many small separate lights, each controlled on its own, fed from one central source, cheap enough that a man would cancel his gas. The trade calls it the subdivision of the electric light. Everyone who had tried it had smashed into the same wall, and the wall was not the lamp. The wall was the wire.
Tell me why the wire is the wall. Help me see it the way you saw it.
Think of it as plumbing, because the sums are the same. To feed many lamps from one source, you run them side by side, in parallel, so each stands on its own, and you can switch one without killing the rest. Very good. But the lamps of the day were greedy. Each one drank a great deal of current. Multiply that thirst across a neighborhood, and the river you must push down the wire becomes enormous. And to carry a river of current without wasting it all as heat, you need thick wire. Copper. Mile upon mile of heavy copper running under every street. I could sit with a pencil and cost it out, and the copper alone would bankrupt the whole scheme before the first lamp was lit. That was the real adversary. Not darkness, but copper.
Let me pause the clock for a moment.
What you're hearing is a dramatized conversation, one that never truly took place. The guest on the other side of it has been gone for decades. But nothing they say is invented. Every word is drawn from the historical record, every fact sourced. Fictional in form, never in substance. If it's been worth your time, one thing keeps it alive. Follow the show, wherever you're listening. That single tap is what lets us keep going, keep improving, and keep bringing back the voices you most want to hear. So tell us who you want next. We're listening. Now, back to the conversation.
So that's the honest size of it, sitting there in September of 1878. Within days of that train ride, you told the newspapers you'd solved it. Central stations, wires under the road, meters, each light on its own, the whole system. And you did not, by your own account, have a working lamp. Why announce the finish before you'd run the race?
I will not dress it up for you. I described the entire system to the New York Sun, the dynamos, the buried conductors, the meter on the wall so a man could be billed for what he burned, the lamps each turning on and off alone. I laid the finished city out in words. And you are right, the lamp to make it real did not yet exist on my bench. What existed was the picture, and I had reason to believe the picture more than most men would.
You could see the whole system, genuinely see it, in a way nobody else quite had. And you presented seeing it as having done it. Those aren't the same thing.
No, but understand what a claim like that does in the world. The moment it was printed, gas shares in London wobbled and money came looking for me. Announcing the future is how you get the means to build it. My name was already worth something after the phonograph, so when I said, "I have it," men with capital chose to believe me. Was I ahead of my apparatus? Considerably. Was that dishonest, or was it the only way to fund 4 years of finding out? I have never been sure those two are as far apart as my critics would like.
The technical journals of the day weren't so charitable, huh?
No, the learned men sniffed. They pointed out, correctly, that subdivision had beaten everyone who'd attempted it, and that a famous man saying "solved" over a problem he hadn't solved was an old and tiresome song. I took the sting of that. But the doubt of experts and the money of investors arrived on the same tide, and only one of them let me keep the lights on at Menlo Park.
And the money didn't stay abstract. It got formalized fast.
Very fast. In October of '78, we incorporated the Edison Electric Light Company. Men connected to Western Union and to Drexel, Morgan put up capital. And that November, I signed an agreement that tells you plainly what I had become. I handed the company my rights in this whole field of electric light and power, present and to come. In return, I took the bulk of the stock and money for the experiments and the promise of royalties. Now weigh what that paper meant. I was no longer a curious man tinkering at a question. I was under contract. Investors had bought a promise. Patents would belong to the company, and I owed them a working system. The pleasant part of the vision was over. Someone had paid for it.
So now the pressure's real, the money's spent, the name's on the line, and you go to work. What was your first serious attempt at the lamp?
Platinum. It was the sensible bet, and I want to say that clearly, because it's easy to laugh at with the answer already in hand. Platinum has a very high melting point. You can drive it white hot without it giving up. So we built lamps around platinum wire, and because even platinum will eventually soften and fail, I added a little governor, a regulator, to cut the current the instant the metal grew too hot. Clever, and, in the end, a dead road.
Why dead?
Because a lamp that needs a tiny mechanical watchman built into every unit is not a thing you can hang in 10,000 homes. It was intricate, it was costly, it was delicate, the opposite of what a service demands. Platinum could survive the heat. Platinum could not survive being sold. As a product, it was hopeless. and by 1879 I could see it.
And yet you don't describe that year as wasted. You're not telling me the failure was secretly the plan.
No, and I dislike men who pretend their wrong turns were cunning all along. I chased platinum because I thought platinum would work. It didn't. But chasing it hard taught us the things we'd need for whatever came next. To keep those filaments alive, we had to get the air out of the glass, really out, far better than anyone bothered with before, and so we pushed our vacuum work forward enormously. We learned how heated materials misbehave, how they let go of trapped gas, how to measure what was actually happening inside the bulb instead of guessing. We worked out the economics, how much light per horsepower, how many lamps a generator could carry, what the whole thing might cost. None of that vanished when platinum failed. It stayed on the shelf, waiting.
And it wasn't only knowledge accumulating. The place itself was also changing under the weight of this.
It had to. A problem this size outgrew any one man's hands very quickly, and mine included. I brought in Francis Upton at the end of '78, a young fella trained in mathematics and physics, schooled in Germany. Where I reasoned from the bench and from 20 years of circuits, Upton reasoned from the equations. He could calculate what resistance a lamp truly needed, what a generator could deliver, what the copper would cost, put numbers under my instincts, and sometimes correct them. Charles Batchelor you already know, my hands at the bench, the man who could actually build the delicate thing I'd only sketched, and judge whether a result was real. And John Cruzy ran the machine shop, turning drawings into iron and brass, into the pumps and instruments and fittings the work demanded.
You're naming three very different kinds of mind. Why is that?
People like to imagine me alone under a lamp, wrestling the answer out of the dark by myself. It was never that. It was mathematics from Upton, a fine experiment from Batchelor, and fabrication from Cruzy, and beyond them a shop filling up with machinists and glass blowers and men whose names never reached a newspaper. I set the target and I drove the pace, hard and not always kindly. But by the middle of 1879, the platinum dream was dead, and what stood in its place was better than a dream. It was an organization that had learned how to get the air out of a bulb, how to measure, how to cost the system, and a growing suspicion that the answer wasn't a stubborn metal at all. It might be something with high resistance, something that need not survive the heat by being tough, but by being thin, and by being carbon.
You ended on carbon, which is a strange place to end, because carbon burns. It's the last thing you'd want near heat. And back at the start, you told me the real enemy was never the lamp at all. It was the copper. So how does a thin piece of carbon do anything about a copper bill?
That is exactly the right question, and almost nobody asks it, because they want the pretty filament and not the arithmetic underneath it. So let me give you the arithmetic without the algebra. Resistance is a kind of stubbornness, how hard a material fights the current trying to pass through it. A fat, low-resistance lamp is an open door. The current pours through, and to feed a whole street of open doors, you need that river of copper I told you would ruin me. Now make the lamp stubborn instead. High resistance. A thin thread that fights the current, so each lamp sips where the old ones gulped. Less current in every lamp means a thinner stream in the wire feeding them, and a thinner stream means far less copper under the street. The lamp and the wire were never two problems. Fix the lamp's appetite, and you fix the copper. That is the whole secret, and it is not a secret about a bulb. It is a secret about a system.
And carbon gives you that stubbornness, that high resistance.
Exactly. A fine carbon thread has all the resistance you could want. The trouble, as you say, is that carbon and air are enemies. Heat it in open air, and it's ash in a heartbeat. But remember what the platinum years bought us: a vacuum better than anyone had trouble to make. Take the air out of the glass, truly out, and there is nothing left to burn the carbon. You've removed its executioner. Suddenly, a thin carbon thread, exactly the thing the copper problem was begging for, can sit there glowing and not destroy itself. Everything we learned chasing the wrong metal is what made the right material possible.
So walk me to the night it worked. October 1879.
We had been carbonizing anything with a fiber to it: paper, card, thread. And on the 22nd of October, we put a piece of ordinary carbonized cotton thread into a good vacuum and set it glowing in the small hours. It held. Hour after hour, past dawn, on into the afternoon, it kept its light. That was the one that told us the path was real.
Now I have to stop you, because this is the most famous night of your life, and nearly everything the public believes about it is wrong. They'll tell you it was the 21st. They'll tell you the lamp burned 40 hours. They'll tell you Thomas Edison alone watched it through the night. Let the record correct all three. Charles Batchelor kept the notebook, and in his hand it reads, "On from 1:30 a.m. till 3 p.m., 13 and a half hours. 13 and a half hours at one level. Then they pushed it harder for about an hour more before the glass cracked. Call it 14 and a half. Not 40. And not one man alone, a team and a notebook."
Well, 40 hours does look better on a poster. 14 and a half is right. Batchelor wrote it down because he was there at the bench with me, and Upton's figures were underneath the whole thing. Over the years, the number acquired a little polish. One genius, one night, was easier to sell than a shop full of men, 14 and a half hours, and an excellent notebook. I should know. I was never shy about selling the story. But the test itself needed no decoration. It proved that a high-resistance carbon filament in a vacuum could give real light for a meaningful span of time. Until then, we were arguing over whether the path existed at all. That night, we found it.
It ended one argument. What did it leave wide open?
Nearly everything. And here I need you to hold two ideas at once, because the world has never once managed it. That thread proved the principle. It did not prove the product, and it came nowhere near proving the service. One lamp glowing on a bench for an afternoon tells you the idea is sound. It tells you nothing about whether you can make 10,000 of them alike, or push current under a mile of city street, or measure what a customer burned, or keep the whole thing running on an ordinary Tuesday when I am not in the room. A working experiment and a working utility are separated by years. In October of 1879, I had just finished the first, and hadn't truly begun the last.
And yet, days later, you're at the patent office.
Of course. On the 4th of November, we filed the application. It became United States Patent 223,898, and it issued that January. And people misread what that patent was for. It was not a flag planted to say, "I made the first glowing wire." Glowing wires were old, and I never pretended otherwise. What it claimed was a high-resistance carbon filament arranged for exactly the parallel system we've been circling. The patent's own language ties the lamp to the practical subdivision of the electric light. It was a system patent wearing a lamp's clothes.
That very week, your own physicist, Francis Upton, wrote home to his father. He wrote plainly, "The electric light is coming up. Real progress." He wrote something about you. He said you were always sanguine, and that your valuations are on your hopes more than on your realities. Your own man, in a private letter, saying the boss prices things at what he wishes they were worth.
And Upton was right, and Upton was useful precisely because he was right. That is why I set a man who reasoned from equations next to a man who reasoned from hope. Yes, I valued the thing at what I meant to make it become, not at what it was on the bench that morning. Left unchecked, that is how a man lies to his investors and to himself. Checked by an Upton with a pencil, it is how a man raises the money and sets the deadline that turned the hope into something real. I never claimed my optimism was harmless. I claimed it was productive. Both were true at once.
Draw me the actual shop, then. Who was in that building, and what was the process itself?
More people than the story remembers, doing more different things than the story allows. Picture it: an upstairs laboratory, a machine shop beneath it, a glass house where men blew and sealed the bulbs, chemicals, drafting tables, notebooks passed from hand to hand. Upton with the mathematics, resistances, generator output, what the copper would cost, the economics of the whole scheme. Bachelor at the bench, the finest pair of hands I ever worked beside, turning a rough notion into an object delicate enough to test and honest enough to trust. Cruzy in the shop, making the pumps and instruments and fittings real in iron and brass. And around those three, at the height of it, 50 or 60 men, machinists, glass blowers, chemists, a steam engineer, laborers, boys, most of whose names never reached a newspaper and never will.
And every one of those men worked for a light that would be called forever the Edison light. You set the hours, you owned the patents, you took the credit. Was that fair?
Fair is your word, not mine. I was running a laboratory, not a democracy. I set the target and I drove the pace, and the pace was brutal. 60-hour weeks that ran to 80, night work, men asleep on the benches. I assumed everyone could burn the way I burned, which was not a kind assumption to make of another man. The rights belonged to the company. The company belonged mostly to me and the investors, and the credit collapsed onto one name, because that is what patents and newspapers do. They need a single face. So no, the reward was not shared the way the work was shared. But hear the other half, or you'll flatten me into a thief. I chose the carbon path over the metal one. I set Upton beside Bachelor on purpose. I mortgaged my own name to raise the money that paid all those wages, and when it failed, I was the one who had to answer for it. Direction is not nothing. It is also not everything. The honest account keeps both in the room at the same time.
By the end of that year, you decide to show it, and not quietly to a few investors, to the public.
To both, in that order. And if you want to see how much larger this was than a bulb, don't read my speeches. Read Cruzy's to-do list. On the 20th of December, he wrote out the preparations, and it opens with an order to have the whole of it done before December 31st. Then comes the list. Not a lamp. Lamps and their clamps, yes, but also a pumping motor, a regulator at the station, chandeliers, a finished meter, street lamps, insulated wire run out along the walkways, the generating room cleaned and made ready. That memorandum is the truest picture of the moment, because it shows that even to put on a show, we first had to build a small system. We lit the laboratory, the offices, the houses, the road. Then we ran a demonstration for the investors just after Christmas and opened it to the public over the new year. The trains came out to Menlo Park packed. People stood in the cold and watched a whole little landscape glowing without a single flame.
That night, everything's lit, the crowd's amazed, the investors are delighted. Could a stranger have run it the next morning? With you gone, and Bachelor gone, and Upton gone, does it still light up on the 2nd of January?
No, and that is the most important no in the whole story. What we showed that New Year was that it could be done, by us, on our own ground, with every man who understood it standing in the room. That is a demonstration. A demonstration is a performance under perfect conditions by the people who built the stage. It is not a service. A service is when it works on an ordinary Tuesday for a stranger who paid his bill, tended by an operator who wasn't there for the invention, and it works whether or not I am even alive. We had proved the first, we had barely begun the second. Everything that looked finished at Menlo Park, the uniform lamp, the durable wire under the street, the honest meter, the man who could mend it when it broke, none of that existed yet. The crowd saw a finish line. I was standing on it knowing it was a starting gun.
So the applause fades and the hard part begins. What was the hard part?
Making the same thing twice. That sounds like a humble little problem. It is one of the deepest problems there is. One perfect lamp built by bachelors' hands is a marvel. 10,000 lamps that all light the same, last the same, and cost little enough to sell, that is an industry, and we did not yet have one. So the work moved from the laboratory bench to the factory floor, and it was every bit as much invention as the thread had been. We hunted for a filament stronger than cotton and found it in carbonized bamboo, tougher, longer lived. But then every bulb had to be pumped to the same vacuum, sealed the same way, each filament held to the same narrow specification for voltage and brightness, by hand, by people, over and over. Lamps came out uneven. The factory bled money. It could make more lamps than the world yet wanted and still not make them cheaply enough. We began real production in 1880 and spent years after it fighting for consistency and for cost. Manufacturing was not the reward that came after the invention. Manufacturing was the invention, continued by other means.
And you didn't only learn on the factory floor. You started putting the system out into the world, in pieces.
Into the world and into places built to punish any weakness. We put a plant aboard a steamship, the Columbia, in 1880, and a ship shakes and rolls and corrodes, which teaches you things a quiet laboratory never will. We wired a lithographer's building in New York, Hines and Ketchum, so real workers could run real machines by our light in a real business. Isolated plants went into mills and hotels and theaters, each one a small, harsh education in wiring, in regulation, in replacing a dead lamp, in training a man to mind it. We showed the whole system in Paris, and across the ocean at Holborn Viaduct in London, we had a central station lighting a public street in January of 1882. before New York, mind you. Every one of those was a lesson paid for in failure, and every one carried us closer to the thing I'd promised the newspapers back in '78.
Which brings us at last to the place you'd been pointing at the whole time. Because all of this, Menlo Park, the ship, the London street, it still isn't the thing you promised. The thing you promised was a city.
A district of a city, supplied the way the gas company supplies it, permanent, in the hardest and most watched place I could find. And there is only one way to learn whether you truly have a utility, and it is not to stage another demonstration on your own friendly ground. It is to go into a real city, with streets you do not own, winter earth frozen hard, buildings full of strangers, investors watching from their offices, and try to keep the lights burning there. Menlo Park had answered every question it was capable of answering. To ask the last and the biggest one, I had to leave it. We were going down to Lower Manhattan.
Of all the places in the world to stake your reputation, why there? The most expensive, most crowded, most watched ground you could possibly pick.
For 3 reasons, and they all pull the same direction. First, the copper. I told you the whole system lived or died on the cost of the wire, and the wire only pays if your customers are packed tightly together. Nowhere in America were lamps going to sit closer than in that dense square of downtown. Short runs, many buildings, little copper wasted on distance. Second, the customers themselves. Banks, brokers, counting houses, the offices that could afford to be first. And third, I'll be honest, the newspapers. If I lit a district in the middle of the financial city, every editor and every investor in the country would see it from his own window. I did not choose the easy ground. I chose the ground where success would be impossible to ignore and failure impossible to hide.
And before a single lamp goes in, there's this extraordinary piece of work that nobody pictures. You didn't just decide to wire the district. You were trying to learn it too?
We had to survey it building by building, almost house by house. Men walked that district and counted gas jets, actually counted the flames a customer was already burning, because a gas jet was a lamp I might replace and a bill I might win. We noted when they burned and for how long. We looked for elevators and machines that might want power in the daytime when the lamps were dark. And all of that counting became a map, not a picture of streets, but a map of demand. From it, we could size the conductors, place the feeders and the mains, set the junctions, work out where each building would tie in. The vision from 1878 finally became a drawing a crew could dig to.
You said feeders and mains. That's a phrase most people would slide right past. Why does the shape of the wiring matter?
Because it's the copper problem again, wearing a different coat. In a plane network, to keep the lamps at the far end as bright as the ones near the station, you'd have to make every wire monstrously thick to fight the voltage sagging along its length, and drown in copper doing it. So instead of one great grid, we ran heavy feeders from the station to chosen points in the district, and lighter mains out from those points to the customers. It let us hold the voltage steady across the whole area without burying a fortune in metal under every street. It was, if you like, the accountant's answer wired into the ground.
And putting it in the ground, that's its own ordeal.
Yes, roughly 80,000 feet of conductor, all of it laid beneath the streets. I insisted on underground because I'd seen how the cities were coming to hate the forests of overhead wire, and because gas and water had already made the underground the respectable place for a utility to live. But the streets of New York do not open gently. We tore them up. Winter came and froze the ground hard. The insulation failed and had to be remade. Every joint between two conductors was a place where the whole thing could leak or short, and we were learning how to make those joints as we dug them. There was no settled trade of electrical wiring to hire, no code, no trained installers, no handbook. We were writing it in the trench, in the cold, under the traffic.
Meanwhile, there's the station itself. When a customer flicks that light on, what's actually standing behind it that they never see?
An industry in a building. The customer sees a clean, flameless little light on his desk. Behind it, at 255 and 257 Pearl Street, sits everything the light pretends it doesn't need. Coal, hauled in and burned. Boilers making steam. Steam engines turning. 6 great engine dynamo units, big machines, each one built to carry something like 1,000 lamps or more. Mounted above the boilers on an iron structure we had to reinforce because their weight and shudder would have torn an ordinary floor apart. Switching gear. A bank of test lamps to check the current. And men, operators standing watch, adjusting the regulation by hand because the thing did not yet run itself. The whole point of the design was to hide all of that from the customer and hand him only the light. But it was there, burning coal. Every second his lamp was lit.
None of that is cheap. What did it cost to prove this could work?
More than the machinery, which is the part people forget. The plant and the distribution system alone ran to something near $300,000. But once you add the administration, the interest on the money, the men canvassing for customers, the patent licenses, the true cost of that first district climbed past $500,000. And here is the number that ought to stop anyone who thinks opening day was a triumph. We did not charge our customers for the current at all. Not for months. Not until early 1883. We had built a business and then given the product away while we learned to run it. Proving the machine worked and proving the business worked were two different mountains, and on opening day I had only climbed the first.
But climb it you did. Take me to the day.
The 4th of September, 1882. We threw the switch at Pearl Street, and the current went out under those downtown streets and into the buildings, and the lamps came up. Something on the order of 400 of them at the start. The point was this, and it had never quite been true before. A coal-fired central station sitting in one place, sending low-voltage direct current out through a permanent underground network into ordinary buildings full of ordinary people, lighting lamps that each man switched on and off for himself. Not a demonstration on my own ground. Not one heroic bulb on a bench. A service in a real district that would still be burning after I'd gone home.
I want to be careful with the word first because it gets thrown at Pearl Street constantly. Was it?
Well, isolated plants were already running in mills and ships. My own central station at Holborn Viaduct in London had been lighting a street since that January, months ahead of New York. So Pearl Street was not the first electric light, nor the first central station on Earth. What it was, precisely, was an early, permanent, and highly visible American incandescent central station utility, running in the financial heart of the largest city in the country.
You forced the world to see that it can work. The largest working electrical lighting network in operation. Now just scale it through the whole country?
I wish. It had limits, serious ones, and I'd rather name them than have you catch me hiding them. That low-voltage direct current I'd built the whole thing on could only reach so far, a mile or so of useful radius before the economics collapsed. To light a further district, you'd need to build another station, and another. The underground insulation was still young and troublesome. The metering was awkward. The business was drowning in capital and years from a profit, and the gas companies did not roll over. They cut their prices and sharpened their own product to keep us out. In time, other men would build with alternating current to push power across long distances in ways my system never could. That was a different problem for a different day, and it doesn't diminish what Pearl Street settled.
So, after all of it, the promise, the platinum, the thread, the factory, the trench, the station, what did you actually invent?
Not electricity. That was centuries of other men's work. Not the first electric light. Davy and a dozen others were ahead of me. Not even, if we're honest, the first incandescent lamp. What my organization and I made was a particular lamp, high resistance, carbon, built for a network. And then the thing that mattered far more, we made all the pieces work together at once as a service. The generation, the distribution, the meter, the fixtures, the factories that could reproduce it, the companies that could finance and install it, the station that could keep it running in a real city. Any one of those pieces existed somewhere in some form. Nobody had made them stand up together and serve a district. That integration, the whole, not the bulb, is the thing I can fairly call mine.
And yet it's called the Edison light. One name, on the work of how many hands?
On the work of hundreds, and there's the ache at the center of it, the thing I can't resolve for you and won't pretend to. The name is not a fraud. I chose the targets. I picked the carbon path. I set Upton's mathematics beside Batchelor's hands and Cruzy's shop. I put my own reputation up to raise the money. I drove the pace, and I answered for the failures. Direction like that is real, and it is rare. But the name is also not the truth, not the whole of it. The patents carried one signature because the law wanted one. The company was owned by me and by my investors, not by the machinist who blew the glass, or the man who froze in the trench laying that copper, or the operator who kept the station steady on a Tuesday night. Newspapers want a single face. Memory wants a single genius. And so the labor of hundreds folded down into one word. Both things are true at once, and every honest account has to carry both. The leader who genuinely led, and the crowd the light was named after, but not credited to. I've never found a way to say it that lets me off that hook, and I've decided I shouldn't be let off it.
I end every one of these the same way. 3 questions put to everyone who sits where you're sitting. First, what do people misunderstand about you the most?
That there was a single thing to invent at all, one object made once that a man could own or be robbed of. That is the bad seed, and both famous stories grow straight out of it. The worshippers say, "Here is the genius, and out of his head came the lamp." The prosecutors lately say, "Here is the magpie who gathered up other men's lamps and stamped his name across them." But they are quarreling over the ownership of a thing that was never a thing. What I made, what the whole shop made, was a fit. A lamp shaped to suit a wire shaped to suit a business shaped to beat the gas company at its own trade. You cannot draw a clean line around an arrangement like that, hold it up and say, "Here is the invention, and it belongs to one man." It was many parts and many hands, bent to a single purpose that I chose and drove. Call that direction. It is real and it is rare, and it is not the same as making the thing alone, and it is not nothing either. That is the whole of the misunderstanding. The world comes looking for the inventor of an object, and I was the organizer of a fit.
Second, what did the world gain from your work, and what did it cost?
Gain and cost. You sound like my bookkeepers. Worse, like a man who wants the sum to come out even and pretty at the bottom. I spent 4 years declining to answer that question honestly for my own investors. I don't know that I'll do better for you at this hour. I guess the world gained a good story and a night lamp as a bonus.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. This was Thomas Edison, the man who gave us a night lamp.
Print it. Put it on the front page. I never once lost sleep over what the papers called me, so long as they spelled it right and ran it large. I fed those men headlines for years. A night lamp is the gentlest thing they ever pinned on me.
So let me frame it for you differently then. What did you give? And what did it actually take?
I can answer that, and it definitely wasn't a light that I gave. Cavemen did that long before me. What the world gained was light you could buy without thinking. Turn a switch, and never once trouble yourself over the coal being shoveled or the copper under the street. A frightening force made into a quiet domestic habit, metered and billed like water in a pipe, and beneath even that, proof that the crossing itself could be built on purpose, by design, and not left to luck. The cost came in 3 parts. The very shape that made it work also hemmed it in, a mile of reach and no further. I raised the money by selling the labor of the many as the marvel of the one, and the world has been copying that ever since. And I drove those men as hard as I drove myself, which is a thing no man has any right to expect of another. Some rose in that fire, some were quietly worn away by it. That was the price, and it was not paid by me alone.
Last one. What should a young builder understand when the prototype works, but the system around it does not yet exist, and they still lack the capital, credibility, or permission to build it?
That the working model is the smallest part of the labor, and worshiping it will cost them years they'll never get back. A model works alone, on a friendly bench, tended by the one who loves it. A system is a great many parts that must all stand up at the same hour, and it is held hostage by its dullest, least ready piece. That bright thing glowing on your table is worth nothing until the wire beside it, and the meter, and the 10,000 copies all made alike, and the hand trained to mend one on a wet Tuesday, and the money to outlast the long wait. Until all of those, the parts no one ever sings about, are also true. Those are not the chores that come after the invention. Those are the invention. So don't build the thrilling piece and pray the rest catches up. My lamp was made stubborn, high resistance, not because it gave a finer light, but because the wire could not afford a greedy one. I built the part backward, from the system it would have to serve. As for what they lack, credibility is not handed to you. It is manufactured, and then it is spent. I spent a name I'd earned elsewhere to buy myself the patience to fail at this one. And permission you win by dressing the strange thing in familiar clothes. I made electricity wear the manners of gas and run underground, where a utility was already allowed to live, so a nervous city could say yes without feeling it had said yes to something new. Believe hard enough to begin. Then spend the rest of your years making the world around the idea true, until a stranger can use the thing and never once need to think of you at all.
So here's what I'll leave you with. A visionary and the organization behind his name carried electric light across the long distance from a glowing thread to a working service. And in 1882, a real district in a real city switched it on. Thomas Edison, thank you.
Thank you, Atlas.
Follow Immortal Minds wherever you are listening, and come back for the next conversation. We'll see you then.